Welcome to Fractured Chaos.
Some say the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves, but I've learned the most destructive ones are the ones we tell to those we love. My name is Terrell Jackson, and for 4 years, I've been living a lie so twisted it's become the backbone of our family portrait. You ever look at your own reflection and wonder who the hell is staring back at you? That's been me every single day since I made the choice that changed everything. Not just for me, but for an innocent child who doesn't know that his brother is actually his father. It started 3 summers ago when Dad brought home his new wife, Tanya. I was 23, fresh out of college with a business degree I wasn't using, living back at home while I figured out my next steps. Dad had encouraged me to stay, saying there was plenty of room in the 5-bedroom colonial he'd purchased after the divorce from my mother 10 years earlier. Looking back, I should have gotten my own place immediately, should have recognized the warning signs of my father's second midlife crisis unfolding in real time. The day they returned from their whirlwind Vegas wedding, I was shooting hoops in the driveway, the July heat pressing down like a weight. The black Escalade pulled up and outstepped my father, looking ridiculous in white linen pants and a Hawaiian shirt unbuttoned 1 button too many. His smile was almost manic, pride and anxiety competing for space on his weathered face. Then the passenger door opened. Tanya emerged like a mirage in the summer heat, 28 years old with caramel skin that seemed to glow from within, and eyes so deep brown they appeared almost black in certain light. She wore a simple white sundress, but there was nothing simple about the way she carried herself. Confident, aware of her effect, and completely out of place in our suburban neighborhood. "Terrell," Dad called out, waving me over. "Come meet your new stepmother." The word stepmother hung in the air like a bad joke. She was barely 5 years older than me, for God's sake. When I approached, my father's arm slung around her waist possessively. "Isn't she something, Terrell?" he asked, not noticing how her gaze lingered on me when he turned away to grab the luggage. I mumbled something appropriate, extended my hand. Her fingers were cool despite the heat, her grip stronger than I expected. "Your father has told me so much about you," she said, her voice carrying a slight southern cadence that somehow made the generic greeting sound intimate. "I feel like I already know you." "Funny," I replied, withdrawing my hand maybe a second too late. "He hasn't mentioned you at all." For just a moment, something flashed across her face. Annoyance, amusement, calculation. Before she laughed, the sound like wind chimes in a storm. "Well, it was a whirlwind romance." She looked up at my father with practiced adoration. "Wasn't it, William?" My father beamed. At 58, with graying temples and a softening midsection, he still carried himself with the confidence of the college quarterback he'd once been. The divorce from my mother had wounded his pride more than his heart, and in the decade since, he'd cycled through relationships with increasing desperation, each woman younger than the last. But none had managed to make it to the altar until Tanya. 2 months from meeting to I do," he boasted, kissing her temple. "When you know, you know." I bit back the question. "Know what exactly? That she's after your money? That she looks at your son like he's deserved?" I told myself I was imagining it. Told myself that the way she brushed against me in the hallway was accidental. That when she asked me to help her reach things in the kitchen while wearing next to nothing, it was innocent. I was wrong. And that's the first lesson in this story. We see what we want to see until the truth becomes impossible to ignore. Those first few weeks were an exercise in avoidance. I picked up extra shifts at the bar where I work nights, started looking at apartment listings, and spent weekends with friends. Anything to escape the suffocating atmosphere at home. When I was there, I could feel Tanya's eyes on me, tracking my movements, assessing my reactions. My father, blinded by whatever spell she'd cast, noticed nothing. Then came his birthday weekend. For years, we'd celebrated at our family's lake house upstate, a tradition that had survived even the bitter divorce from my mother. This year would be no different, except that instead of it being just the 2 of us with fishing rods and beers, it would include his new bride. I'd planned to back out, had a whole excuse prepared about covering a shift for a co-worker. But then Dad called me into his study the week before. "I need you there, son," he said, looking unusually vulnerable behind his imposing mahogany desk. "This is important to me, blending our new family." Something in his expression, a mixture of hope and fear, made it impossible to say no. For all his faults, and there were many, William Jackson had been a constant in my life when my mother had not. After she left, disappearing to find herself in New Mexico with barely a backward glance at her only child, Dad had stepped up. In his rigid, emotionally constipated way, he'd been there. So I agreed. We drove up separately. Dad and Tanya in the Escalade, me following in my beat-up Subaru. The lake house sat on 2 acres of wooded property, the water just visible through a cluster of pines. It was modest by my father's standards. 3 bedrooms, an open-concept living area, and a deck that wrapped around 2 sides. The place smelled of pine and memories. That first evening passed without incident. We grilled steaks, drank decent wine, and engaged in careful conversation. Tanya played the role of adoring wife flawlessly, hanging on Dad's every word, laughing at his worn-out jokes, touching his arm at perfectly timed intervals. If there was calculation behind her warm smile, only I seemed to notice it. Then came the call. Just after breakfast on Saturday morning, Dad's cell phone rang. He excused himself to the deck, his expression darkening as the conversation continued. When he returned, his face was a mask of disappointment and resolve. There's an emergency at the Tokyo office, he explained, already reaching for his laptop. Systems crash affecting the entire Pacific Division. I have to go in. On your birthday weekend, I asked, though I wasn't surprised. Work had always been his refuge, his identity. Can't be helped, he said, already mentally elsewhere. The board is meeting an emergency session, and I need to be there to contain the damage. Tanya played her part perfectly, disappointed but understanding, urging him to do what he needed to do. Within an hour, he was packed and heading to the door, keys in hand. Keep her company, he said to me over his shoulder. I'll be back Sunday night if everything goes smoothly. The moment his car disappeared down the gravel drive, something in the air changed. The house seemed smaller, charged with possibility and danger. Tanya suggested a swim, and I mumbled something about work I needed to catch up on. I retreated to my room, spent hours staring at my laptop screen without seeing it. By evening, dark clouds had gathered over the lake. The weather report warned of severe thunderstorms, and sure enough, by 8 o'clock, rain was lashing the windows and lightning split the sky at irregular intervals. The power flickered once, twice, then died completely. I emerged from my room to find Tanya in the living room, illuminated by a half-dozen candles she'd found and arranged around the space. She'd changed into silk pajama shorts and a thin tank top, her hair loose around her shoulders. Perfect timing, she said, gesturing to the coffee table where she'd set out a bottle of Dad's expensive scotch, the Macallan 25 he saved for special occasions, and 2 crystal tumblers. I was just about to brave the storm by myself. I should have made an excuse, should have retreated to my room with a flashlight and a book. Instead, I sat on the couch opposite her and accepted the 2 fingers of amber liquid she pushed toward me. To your father, she said, raising her glass. Happy birthday in absentia. I hesitated, then clinked my glass against hers. The scotch burned pleasantly going down, warming me from the inside. Outside, thunder cracked so loudly the windows rattled. He does this a lot, doesn't he? She asked after a moment. Chooses work over personal commitments. The question felt like a trap, but the scotch was making me careless. It's who he is, I replied. Work has always come first. Not always, Tanya said, her voice taking on a confessional tone. In Vegas, when we met, he was different. Present, attentive. She took another sip, her eyes never leaving mine over the rim of her glass. Nothing like he is now. 1 drink became 3, and conversations about my father became confessions about her marriage. How lonely she was. How my father hadn't touched her in months. How she'd made a mistake but couldn't find a way out that wouldn't leave her destitute. The prenup he'd insisted on was ironclad. You look just like him, she whispered, except her eyes said something else. But younger, stronger, more alive. She moved to sit beside me, the scent of her perfume, something expensive and subtle, filling my senses. When her hand landed on my knee, I didn't move it away. I knew it was wrong. Every cell in my body knew it, but sometimes the line between right and wrong blurs when you're standing too close to the edge. And here's where I reveal something I've never admitted to another soul. I didn't resist, not even a little. Because deep down, taking something that belonged to my father felt like justice for years of feeling second best. For every baseball game he'd missed because of a conference call. For every school play he'd shown up too late and left early. For every not now son when I needed his attention. What followed that night was inevitable, explosive, and unforgivable. In the pale light of Sunday morning, with rain still pattering against the windows, I felt the first stirrings of shame. Tanya slept beside me, her breathing deep and even, one arm flung across my chest in casual possession. I extracted myself carefully, gathered my clothes from where they'd been discarded, and slipped back to my own room, scrubbing myself raw in the shower as if I could wash away what we'd done. When Tanya emerged hours later, there was no trace of regret or shame on her face. She made coffee in the kitchen, humming softly to herself, and when she handed me a mug, her fingers brushed mine deliberately. Last night she paused, searching for the right word. Illuminating. I couldn't meet her eyes. It was a mistake, I said, voice low. One that can never happen again. She laughed then, not unkindly. We'll see. What followed was 3 weeks of secret messages, rendezvous whenever he was away, and promises neither of us intended to keep. Then it ended as quickly as it began. Tanya grew distant, said we needed to stop. I assumed she'd developed a conscience. 6 weeks later, I discovered the real reason. She was pregnant. The revelation came on a Tuesday evening. Dad was working late again, and I just returned from a job interview at a marketing firm downtown. Tanya was sitting at the kitchen island, a glass of water untouched before her, her expression unreadable. We need to talk, she said without preamble. Something in her tone made my stomach drop. I sat across from her, maintaining a safe distance, the granite countertop a DMZ between us. I'm pregnant, she said, the words falling like stones. For one dizzy, terrible moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind raced through calculations, dates, times, possibilities. Is it? I started to ask. Does it matter? She cut me off, her voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. I'm married to your father. This baby is your father's as far as anyone will ever know. Her eyes weren't seductive anymore. They were calculating, determined. If you ever say otherwise, I'll destroy everything you care about. What does that mean? I asked, though I already knew. It means I'll tell him everything. How you seduced me at the lake house while he was away. How you've been obsessed with me since the day we met. How you couldn't stand to see him happy, so you tried to take what was his. Her smile was cold. Who do you think he'll believe? His devoted wife carrying his miracle child? Or his aimless son who's resented him since the divorce? She was right, and we both knew it. In my father's eyes, I'd always been my mother's son. Impulsive, emotional, prone to poor decisions. He loved me, but he didn't trust me. Not the way he trusted his own judgment. Even when that judgment led him to marry a woman half his age after knowing her for 8 weeks. You planned this, I said, the realization dawning slowly. From the beginning. Tanya tilted her head, considering me. Not you specifically, she admitted. But yes, a child was always part of the plan. The prenup has a generous provision for any offspring. Your father made sure of that. She shrugged elegantly. You just made it easier, less clinical. I felt sick, used and worse, complicit. I'll tell him myself, I threatened, standing up so quickly my stool toppled backward. Right now. You won't, she said with calm certainty, because you know what it would do to him. The humiliation, the betrayal, not just from me, but from you, the one person he's always counted on. She stood, smoothing her blouse over her still flat stomach. Besides, what would be the point? The damage is done. This baby exists. Would you really deny your father the joy of believing he has a second chance at fatherhood? Would you really subject an innocent child to that kind of chaos from the start? Every word was a carefully placed arrow, finding its mark with unerring precision. She'd read me perfectly, understood my weaknesses, my sense of honor, twisted as it was, and my complicated love for my father. I'm moving out, I said finally, the only solution I could see. Tonight. No, Tanya replied calmly. You're not. You can't stop me. If you leave now, right after I've shared this joyous news with you, but before your father knows, it will look suspicious. Her logic was flawless, terrible. You'll stay. You'll congratulate us publicly. You'll play your role in this family portrait until it's natural for you to move on. Her hand went to her stomach in an unconsciously protective gesture. And you'll never breathe a word of this to anyone. I watched my father transform when he heard the news that night. This man who'd barely shown emotion at my college graduation wept openly when Tanya placed his hand on her stomach. A second chance, he kept saying. A miracle at my age. And every time he said it, another piece of me died. For 9 months, I lived in purgatory, watching her belly grow with what I knew was my child. Dad threw himself into preparations with an enthusiasm I'd never seen him direct toward anything but work. He converted the home office into a nursery, painted the walls himself on weekends, assembled furniture with careful precision. I miss so much of your childhood, he told me one Saturday as we installed a ceiling fan in the nursery. Always working, building the company. I thought I was doing it for you, for our future, but I realize now I was doing it for myself. He tightened the screw with more force than necessary. I won't make the same mistake twice. The sincerity in his voice cut deeper than any accusation could have. For the first time in years, I glimpsed the father I'd idolized as a child. Dedicated, purposeful, capable of growth and change. And I was robbing him of an authentic chance to make good on his promises. Tanya, meanwhile, played her role with Oscar-worthy precision. She attended birthing classes with my father, invited his colleagues' wives for lunch, filled Instagram with tasteful pregnancy photos and gushing captions about my amazing husband and our growing family. To the outside world, they were the perfect May-December couple, defying skeptics, preparing for their miracle baby. In private, she was coldly pragmatic. Sometimes, when no one was looking, Tanya would place my hand on her stomach and whisper, "Feel that? That's your leverage disappearing." She knew exactly what she was doing, making me an accomplice in my own torment. I started therapy under the guise of career counseling, desperate for some outlet for the toxic brew of guilt, rage, and anticipation swirling inside me. I could never tell the full truth, of course, but even speaking in hypotheticals helped preserve what was left of my sanity. What would you do, I asked my therapist once, if you knew something that would destroy someone you love, but telling the truth would cause even more damage than the lie? Dr. Patterson, a gentle-eyed woman in her 50s, considered the question carefully. Sometimes, she said, the most ethical choice isn't between right and wrong. It's between wrong and less wrong, between harm and greater harm. That's not very helpful, I said. No, she agreed, but it's honest. And sometimes, honesty with yourself about the impossible nature of your choices is the only peace you'll find. As Tanya's due date approached, I lined up a job in another city, Chicago, far enough to create distance but close enough to return for important family events. I signed a lease on an apartment, started packing my things in increments my father wouldn't notice. Escape seemed possible, if not redemption. Then, 3 weeks before her scheduled C-section, Tanya went into early labor. Dad called me in a panic from the hospital. "It's happening," he said, his voice thin with anxiety. "Can you bring the hospital bag? It's in our closet." I found the meticulously packed duffel where he'd said it would be. As I lifted it, something fell from the side pocket. A small black notebook I recognized as my father's journal. He'd kept one for as long as I could remember, jotting down thoughts and plans in his precise handwriting. It had fallen open to a recent entry, and before I could stop myself, I read, T is worried about the baby coming early. Doctor says everything looks normal, but still, I can't lose this chance. Sometimes I look at T sleeping and wonder what she sees in an old man like me. Sometimes I catch her watching Betrayal, and I see something in her eyes that scares me. Am I imagining it? Projecting my own insecurities? She chose me. The baby is mine. I need to stop these thoughts. I closed the journal with shaking hands, returned it to the bag. The knowledge that my father harbored suspicions, however subconscious, however quickly dismissed, added a new layer of complexity to our already twisted situation. At the hospital, I found him pacing the maternity ward waiting room, his face gray with tension. When he saw me, relief flooded his features. "Any news?" I asked, handing over the bag. She's in surgery now," he said, checking his watch. "Emergency C-section. Baby's heart rate was dropping." A cold fear gripped me, different from the anxiety I'd been living with for months. This was primal, instinctive. Whatever twisted circumstances had led to this moment, whatever sins I'd committed, that was my child in danger. We waited in silence, the minutes stretching into hours. Finally, a nurse appeared, her face wreathed in smiles. "Mr. Jackson," she called, "would you like to meet your son?" When Malcolm was born, yes, my father named him after his own father, I wasn't prepared for what I felt. This wasn't just some abstract concept anymore. This was a person, my son, with my dimpled chin and my mother's eyes. The nurse led us to the recovery room where Tanya lay propped against pillows, looking exhausted but triumphant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in the standard hospital blanket, a blue cap covering wispy dark hair. Dad approached reverently, tears streaming unashamed down his face. When Tanya placed the baby in his arms, he seemed to fold in on himself. his large frame curving protectively around this new life. "Oh, Malcolm William Jackson," he whispered. "Welcome to the world, little man." He turned to me then, extending his arms. "Would you like to hold your brother?" "A brother?" The word hit me like a physical blow, but I stepped forward, accepted the warm weight of my son, my brother, into my arms. Malcolm's eyes were shut tight, his tiny face still swollen from birth. But even then, I could see myself in the shape of his nose, the curve of his earlobes. The nurse even remarked how much he resembled me rather than my father. Tanya quickly laughed it off. "Family genes run strong," she said, shooting me a warning glance. That night, alone in my car in the hospital parking garage, I broke down completely. Great heaving sobs that seemed to come from someplace deeper than I knew existed within me. I cried for my son, who would never know me as his father. I cried for my father, living in blissful ignorance of our betrayal. I cried for the man I had been and the man I would have to become to survive this. Here's something most people don't tell you about living a double life. It's not the big moments that break you. It's the small ones, like when Malcolm took his first steps toward me, not my father, or when he said his first word, not mama or dada, but two for Terrell. Each milestone became another twist of the knife. Each family photo, another life framed on the wall. Dad took a step back from work, delegating more to his executive team so he could be present for Malcolm's early years. He became the father I had always wanted, patient, engaged, delighting in the smallest developments. Sometimes, watching them together, I could almost convince myself that the lie was justified, that this fragile happiness was worth protecting. Tanya settled comfortably into her role as society wife and mother, joining the right committees, hosting dinner parties where she flirted just enough with my father's colleagues to make him proud, but not enough to make him suspicious. She was careful around me now, maintaining a practiced distance that would appear natural to outsiders. The only acknowledgement of our shared secret came in rare, unguarded moments when Malcolm would do something that unmistakably mirrored one of my mannerisms. The way he furrowed his brow in concentration, the particular angle at which he tilted his head when confused. "He gets that from you," she would murmur when no one else could hear. Not with pride, but as a reminder of the power she held. By Malcolm's third birthday, the pressure was crushing me. I started drinking, staying out late, anything to avoid being home. My father noticed, tried to talk to me about it. "You're like a stranger these days, son," he said. The irony almost made me laugh. If only he knew he was raising my child while lecturing me about responsibility. What I didn't expect was Tanya's next move. She started inviting women over, trying to set me up. "You need to start your own family," she'd say in front of my father, her eyes glittering with hidden meaning. She was terrified I'd get too attached to Malcolm, that someone might notice the bond between us wasn't simply brotherly. "Angela from my book club would be perfect for you," she'd say. "Or my yoga instructor's sister just moved to town. She's exactly your type." Each suggestion came wrapped in sisterly concern, but the message was clear. Create your own life, your own family, and leave ours alone. Then came the night that everything nearly fell apart. Malcolm was having nightmares, screaming for me, not my father, in the middle of the night. Dad was confused, hurt even. "Why does he want you?" he asked me. I mumbled something about being the fun one, the cool big brother, but Tanya saw the danger. The next day, she announced they were moving across town. "We need our own space," she told my father. "Terrell's influence is confusing Malcolm." My father didn't question it. He never questioned her. The distance helped and hurt in equal measure. I saw Malcolm less frequently, but more intentionally. Sunday dinners became our tradition, and occasionally I'd babysit when my father and Tanya attended events together. These hours alone with my son were precious torture, time to build a relationship that could never be what it should be. Malcolm was growing into a bright, curious child with my father's confidence, and I like to think, my creativity. He loved dinosaurs in space, could recite the names of planets in order, and had an uncanny ability to remember song lyrics after hearing them just once. Uncle Terrell, he called me, the title both a wound and a privilege. I dated sporadically, never allowing relationships to progress beyond a few months. How could I commit to someone when I was living half a life? How could I start a family knowing my firstborn was being raised by my father? 4 months ago, I reached my breaking point. I couldn't take it anymore. The lies, the separation from my son, the constant performance. I decided to tell my father everything. Consequences be damned. I drove to their house with a speech rehearsed, evidence compiled, text messages, photos, a timeline of events. But when I arrived, I found my father sitting alone on the porch, staring at nothing. He looked smaller somehow, older than his years. When he saw me, he tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Doctor says I need bypass surgery, he told me without preamble. Triple, pretty serious stuff. In that moment, all my righteous anger collapsed. This man, flawed as he was, had raised me, had given me everything he knew how to give, and despite everything, he loved Malcolm with a fierceness that I couldn't deny. The truth I was about to unleash would destroy him. Not just emotionally, but perhaps physically. The stress could kill him. So I swallowed my confession along with my pride and sat beside him instead. We talked about nothing important as the sun set, and I made a different choice than the one I planned. I'm scared, Terrell, he admitted, as twilight deepened, his voice uncharacteristically small. Not of dying, everyone dies, but of leaving things unfinished, of not seeing Malcolm grow up. The knife twisted again, but I placed my hand on his shoulder. You'll be fine, I assured him. You're too stubborn not to be. He laughed then, a short bark of acknowledgement. Like your mother always said, stubborn as a Missouri mule. We sat in companionable silence for a while longer before he spoke again. I haven't been the father you deserved, he said, eyes fixed on the darkening horizon. I know that. I've been trying to do better with Malcolm, but sometimes I wonder if it's too late to do better with you. The simplicity of the confession, delivered without expectation of absolution, broke something free inside me. For the first time in years, I saw my father not as the distant authority figure of my childhood or the oblivious cuckold of recent years, but as a human being, complicated, flawed, capable of growth. 2 days later, I met Tanya alone. I asked her to meet me at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory, away from curious eyes and ears. The conversation was brief, surgical. I told her I was leaving, moving across the country. She could keep her secret and her leverage, but I had one condition: Malcolm would know me. I would be in his life as his brother, and she would never interfere with that relationship. Why would you leave? She asked, suspicious of my surrender. Because staying is killing me, I answered honestly, and telling the truth might kill my father. Something shifted in her expression then, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her in years. Not quite remorse, but recognition. A mutual acknowledgement of the wreckage we'd created. He loves that boy more than anything, she said after a long pause. Her voice had lost its usual sharp edge. More than me. More than the company. Maybe even more than you. I know, I replied, and I did. Whatever my father's failures with me, his devotion to Malcolm was absolute and genuine. If you ever tell him, she continued, it won't just destroy him. It will destroy Malcolm too. Children need certainty, stability. The truth doesn't always set people free, Terrell. Sometimes it just breaks what wasn't completely broken. In that moment, I glimpsed something unexpected in Tanya. Not the manipulative seductress or the calculating gold digger, but a mother fiercely protecting her child's happiness and security. It didn't excuse what she'd done, what we'd done, but it complicated the neat categories of villain and victim I'd constructed. She agreed to my terms. I think she was relieved. It's been 3 months since I moved to Seattle. The physical distance has provided a kind of breathing room I didn't know I needed. I found work at a marketing agency specializing in sustainable businesses. Rented an apartment with a view of Puget Sound. Started hiking on weekends. Small steps toward building a life not defined entirely by secrets and regrets. I call Malcolm twice a week on video chat. He shows me his drawings, tells me about kindergarten. My father's surgery was successful. He's recovering well, enjoying his retirement, oblivious to the truth. Sometimes I wonder if my silence is courage or cowardice, if I'm protecting my father or just myself, if Malcolm deserves to know who he really is someday. But here's the twist most people don't expect. Living with this secret hasn't made me bitter. It's made me determined to be worthy of the title I can never publicly claim. I may not be Malcolm's father in the eyes of the world, but I am his blood. And someday when he's older or my father has passed, perhaps the truth can come out in a way that honors the complicated love that created him. Until then, I'll be the best damn brother any kid could ask for. I'll be there for every graduation, every heartbreak, every triumph. I'll teach him everything my father taught me and all the things he didn't. Last month I started dating again. Nothing serious, just coffee with a pediatric nurse named Elena who loves hiking as much as I do. When she asked about my family, I showed her a picture of Malcolm, explained he was my little brother. The half-truth felt less painful than it once had. "Oh, you obviously adore him," she said, studying the photo of Malcolm on my shoulders at the zoo. "More than anything," I replied honestly. "That says a lot about you," she observed. "How we love the children in our lives reveals who we really are." The comment stayed with me for days afterward. Perhaps that's the redemption in this mess. Not absolution for my sins, but the opportunity to love without expectation, to give without recognition, because that's the final irony of this whole twisted story. Through this terrible deception, I've learned what it truly means to put someone else before yourself, to love without possession, to parent without acknowledgement. And maybe, just maybe, that makes me more of a father than the title itself ever could. Dad called yesterday. Malcolm has been asking when I'm coming to visit. He misses his big brother, Dad said, pride and affection evident in his voice. We both do. I promised to fly down for Malcolm's 5th birthday next month. Already I'm planning the perfect gift. A telescope so we can look at the stars together. So I can teach him about constellations and planets and the infinite possibilities of the universe. So I can show him how to look beyond what's immediately visible to the deeper truths that connect everything. They say confession is good for the soul. I'm not sure if that's true, but I know this. Some secrets we carry, not because we can't face the truth, but because sometimes protecting a beautiful lie is the greatest sacrifice we can make for the people we love. Even when one of those people is the child who will never know you gave him life. But perhaps someday he will know that I gave him something more valuable, a love uncomplicated by expectations, unstained by resentment, unbound by conventional labels. And in the end, isn't that what being a father is really about?